Well, welcome everyone. We have Murad back today, and he's going to be dealing with that famous hadith, the sheep that ate the Quran. Welcome, Murad.
Thank you for having me, and today we will be discussing the sheep that ate the Quran. Did the story happen or it didn't? We will see. But right off, I'm saying that it never happened. This is the famous hadith, and I will just ask you to read it.
Okay. It was narrated that Aisha said the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the Messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it. There you go.
This is the famous hadith, and most people they take it that how come God didn't defend the Quran and leave it to be eaten by a sheep. But we will see why was this hadith actually fabricated. Here, what was in this paper? The verse of stoning and breastfeeding an adult. This is important because we will see throughout the presentation why only these verses. Now here it says, the paper was with me under my pillow. I searched for the Arabic word and it's waraqa. Waraqa is paper. This is a huge problem because there was no paper in the desert of Arabia back at that time. This is historical anachronism at its best. What do you think?
Absolutely. There was definitely no paper in Arabia in the 7th century. You could possibly, at a stretch, make an argument for it in the late 8th century, maybe, but not in the 7th century. And I think in Europe, it didn't arrive in Europe itself till the 11th century, 11th or 12th century, around that time. So I find it hard to believe that it was in Arabia in the 7th century.
Yes, it was made by the Chinese in the 9th century, and then the Abbasids, they used it from the Chinese. Yeah. So nothing before that, no paper before that.
Yeah.
Now let's see the word my pillow. It says under my pillow. The original is sarir, which means bed. So bed, not pillow.
Oh.
There was no pillow in the desert of Arabia still. And there was no beds in the tent. Or what do you think of this?
Well, there's lots of problems here, but straight off, why did they change it from bed to pillow? Like, one suggestion might be that the idea of Aisha, Muhammad's wife, leaving passages of the Quran on the floor would be considered wrong. So is that why they've changed the translation? That's just the first thing that occurs to me.
The people who translate in English, they knew there was a problem. So they had to switch to pillow because they sensed that there was no bed back there, not because the Quran was on the floor.
All right, okay, yeah.
So when they make it a pillow, then you can stretch your imagination. It could be a pillow, it could be a blanket that it's rolled, anything, but just no beds now.
But actually, technically, it says in Arabic, a bed.
Yes, sarir, here is the word. Yeah. Anyone who knows Arabic, tell me what does sarir mean?
Yeah.
It's a bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what came in and ate it? You see here it says, and a tame sheep came and ate it. Was it a tame sheep? Or was it a goat? We have another narration. In Arabic says ma'az, which means goat. Or was it an insect? We have another thing says duwayba. Duwayba means something, a dabba, which is very small, something like an insect. This is another thing in Arabic. Or was it a chicken? You have another one called dajin. Dajin, it could mean a chicken, or it could mean something that it's tame. We do not know what, a sheep or anything. It could have the two meanings. But today in Saudi Arabia, if you want to go to a restaurant, you says, I want dawajin, I want dajin. It means chicken.
Yeah.
So what was it? And I am asking you now, why do you think they standardized the English just for team sheep?
Well, I suppose the initial thing is if there are 4 different versions of this going around, it obviously means that the story is made up or is incredibly unreliable. So imagine they were trying to hide the variation in the text.
They are hiding the variation because they sensed the problem. This is always happening in the English translation, as you see.
Yeah.
They try to standardize it so that the West doesn't do what we are doing now.
The other thing,
yes.
Yeah, sorry. The other thing is, would the Arabs have a bed in a tent? That doesn't sound right to me.
They don't till now. You see, till now, if you want to go and camp anywhere, you do not take a bed.
Yeah, you would have a tent. You would have a sleeping mat. Presumably, that's what I would do.
Yes, and we will see the scenarios. What if it's a sleeping mat? We will look at everything under the microscope now.
Yeah.
Before we do that, we have to look at the paper dilemma. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
Now, if you can read this part, because this is crucial.
It has been said that knowledge of papermaking was passed to the Islamic world after the Battle of Talas in 751 AD, when 2 Chinese papermakers were captured as prisoners. Although the veracity of this story is uncertain, paper started to be made in Samarkand soon after. In the 13th century, the knowledge and uses of paper spread from the Middle East to medieval Europe, where the first water-powered paper mills were built. Because paper was introduced to the West through the city of Baghdad, it first was called Bagdatikos, I think. I don't know how you say it. Bagdatikos.
Bagdatikos.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
here you see, after 751, that is, if we will believe the story of the Chinese paper makers and stuff.
Yeah, at the very earliest. Yeah.
Another thing is that this began in Samarkand. Remember Samarkand?
Yeah.
We have a Quranic manuscript in Samarkand. Where is Samarkand? Here it is.
Yeah. That's way off.
Yes, this is the same areas we always keep pointing at.
Mm-hmm.
Here is Bukhara of Bukhari.
Yeah.
And look here, this is Qarshi. Gabriel Sauma says that Qarshi is the same as Qarashi, which is Quraysh. This is very important.
This strikes me as there's 2 options here. It could be that at the time of the Hadiths, at the time the Hadiths were being written, they had paper because it was now that, maybe because it was in the late 8th century. But the fact that they presumed that there was paper back at the time in Muhammad is anachronistic. So either way, it doesn't work. But the other scenario would be that the word paper would suggest that the Hadith itself was written not in the 8th century, but much later. So there's one of those 2 options, but neither of those is good for Islam, let's say.
Yes, I go with option 2, that they were already written later and they did this historical anachronism without noticing.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's test this out, because there are still people who this happened. Let's see if it happened or not. You have scenario 1. For sheep to touch the paper, that needs to be higher than the ground. This is just logic. We are only using logic here. The problem is there were no beds in Arabia back then. So you will have a bed like this. The paper will be here, and the sheep will come here. This could be right, but there were no beds that were high from the ground back then. So this is a problem in scenario 1. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it just seems a bit odd to have a bed like that, particularly in a tent. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Scenario 2, that the mattress was on the floor. The problem is it would disappear. The sheep would not see it in the first place. Plus, there were no mattresses back in Arabia. So this is a mattress, and it could be a different shape, no problem, but it's on the floor. And the paper will be stuffed inside. The sheep will not notice it. What do you think?
Yeah, there's that too, and also the fact is a sheep wouldn't eat paper anyway. I've never seen a sheep even attempt to eat paper. It's not part of their diet. You know.
Exactly. Why would they need paper?
Yeah.
And if it took the paper from under the mattress, then it definitely made noise, and it made, people will notice. This will be horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, the story, I think it never happened because it's illogical, and it has this historical anachronism because the paper never existed. It has contradictions. What is the animal who came? Is it a sheep or a goat or a chicken or an insect? An insect is also very wrong. It will take tons of time to finish this paper.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there's also the issue of the sheep coming into the room as well.
Exactly. You see that people say, if you want to talk with the people of the Prophet, his wives, talk from behind the hijab or from behind a door, something like this. So they had a door and they locked it. Now, why is the door not locked?
Yeah. So if the bed, or let's say her sleeping quarters, was in a tent, then there wouldn't be a bed, it'd be a mat. If it was in a house, there's no way a sheep would be just wandering into the house if they're locking it up to protect his wives.
Exactly. So if you try to save it from here, it will blow up from here.
Yeah.
It is mentioned much later than Aisha had lived. This is the original problem, of course, that the hadith is always very late.
Yeah.
And I put Aisha between two quotations because I think she was not a historical figure herself.
Yeah.
It ignores the fact that women lactate midpoint of pregnancy. Now let's go to breastfeeding, because this is what was lost from the paper.
Oh, right. You're referring to the story in that was on the paper now.
Yes, okay, the paper was lost, either for a sheep or anyone. No problem. The final result is the paper is lost. What did this paper have? It had the breastfeeding of an adult.
Yeah, and the stoning.
And the stoning.
Yeah.
I got this from a website about a mom who is asking about milk production. Milk production begins at the midpoint of pregnancy for most mothers. Milk will come in, increase in quality, and begin the change to mature milk between days 2 and 5. So a woman doesn't always have milk in her breast.
Yeah.
She has to be pregnant or after pregnancy.
Yeah.
Here we will go to the final question. Why was this story composed? Of course, people will say the story was not composed because it is negative to Muhammad and his wives. I say it definitely was composed. It never happened. You see, people wanted to suckle breasts because it leads for sex. This is what men want in these times, and this is not a secret. What do they do? A good cover-up would be for her to be his mother. So he will say, I will just suck the breast of this woman so that she will be my mother and nothing else. Okay, why 10 times? Let's assume you are right. Just take one sip. Why 10 times? Because every time is a single independent time with another 6. They redacted this hadith to a woman, which is Aisha. so that when another woman hears the story, they would accept it easily, since Aisha as a woman would not make this up. What do you think?
Yeah, it sounds like if a guy wanted to sleep with a woman in those times, if they had a hadith like or a story like this, which said that there was a breastfeeding verse, they could use that as an excuse potentially. So that makes sense. And the women couldn't challenge it because if it was woman retelling it, especially Muhammad's favorite wife, it kind of covers that possibility that women would disagree with the verse.
Exactly. So you are faced with a scenario that, like the Wizard of Oz, you have the puppet, which is Aisha, and the one who is orchestrating this puppet is a man. Now, the sheep story was not to prove that some Quran was lost, as the people think, but to prove that the breastfeeding verse was original, that it was part of the Quran.
So it's like it was the best of both worlds. It was in the Quran, but not in the Quran.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is perfect.
Yeah. And actually,
Yes,
the other thing is, if you wanted a verse like that to be in the Quran, and it's too late to put it in because it's gone too far past time to put extra verses into the Quran, this was a way around that.
This is exactly it. So now you have the Quran codified, people are reading it, paper is introduced, new world. You cannot do what you did before.
Yeah.
How do you get around this? You make hadith, you make a chain of transmissions, and you put stuff like this.
This also suggests that verses had been added to the Quran before to suit circumstances, and it just, at this point, it was not it wasn't possible any longer. So this suggests that there was a tradition of adding bits and pieces to the Quran when it suited them.
Exactly. As you see, the Quran is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. So
Mhm.
the idea that we are losing Quran, no. We see the first manuscript very small, then it keeps getting bigger. You keep adding to it. Do you know the movie Goodfellas?
It's been a while. Yeah, I've seen it years ago.
The real man of Goodfellas, he was on a radio show and he was joking. He said that in the old days, we used to bury someone very quickly and the police would never notice. But now, with the technology, we cannot do anything like this now. He was a serial killer and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like the same thing here. In the old days, we used to add to the Quran, no one noticed. Now it's too late. We have to come up with traditions like this.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, other pious hadith, and I call them pious hadith, popped up later that it was by filling a cup of milk without suckling the breasts to water down the stories. So whenever you ask a Sunni Muslim now, what about the breastfeeding? They will say, oh, it just happened once with a woman and it was by filling the cup with her milk. And it only happened once. So you see, this is something very rare.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that this story came up to water down the other story. They cannot remove the other story now. It became concrete. So they have to come up with this other hadith.
Yeah.
The same thing applies to the stoning verse. The Quran never had a stoning verse. Stoning was an ancient Israelite, I think, practice, if you can confirm this.
Yeah, it was, yeah. The
Yes,
Old Testament.
In the Old Testament, and then they do not do it anymore. But people, the new Muslims, they want to stone. And at the same time, they do not have stoning verses in the Quran. So they put it on the mouth of Umar ibn al-Khattab, which I think is a fictitious character. And then they say it was in the Quran and it got lost again. And it's funny that these people, they always remember horrible verses. They never remember animal verses.
They sorry,
So
they
we
never
lost.
what?
What?
You broke up there. They never what?
They say the Quran, like third of it was lost due to in the war of Siffin, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, then it's lost. He will say, no, but I remember one verse. Oh, what is this verse? It is a horrible of stoning. That's what I remember. Now let's stone people, please. This is the idea.
But always bad verses, nothing positive or good that are remembered.
Yes, you see the pattern. They always remember the horrible verses only.
Yeah.
Because it is made up. The stoning and breastfeeding was never part of the Quran.
Yeah.
And you see, this is against nature for people to suck the breast of an immature woman for this silly reason.
Yeah.
Because after they made up all this hadith, they still couldn't suck breasts easily because it's against the women, it's against nature.
Yeah.
So that's all I have to say, and I want people to say their opinion.
Well, that was very good, Murad, and definitely will lead us to view that hadith in a different light. There's multiple ways in which this hadith is shown today to be fictional, and it just goes to show how unreliable the hadith is in general. You know, it's not very historically accurate at all, to say it mildly.
We have our commenter, which is Betsy. She always keeps looking at these kind of hadith, and I think she will love the material of today, because she as a woman she hates, of course, these horrible stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Murad, thank you very much for coming on the show again today. It was fantastic. I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Let me stop that.